Well, let's talk about the Smiths. Let's rank their studio albums. Be warned, this one could get mopey. Welcome classic rock fans to another ranking video, worst to best so to speak, and I thought I'd turn my attention on the Smiths. Let's look at their studio content, all 4 albums. If you're new to this channel, please do click like, subscribe and check that notification bell. It makes all the difference to the YouTube algorithm. And check some of the links below this video for ways you can support the sterling work done at Classic Album Review. Become a patron, why not? There's a fine body of work on my Patreon and we're forming a real classic rock community. Well, that's that said. Anyway, enough of this piffle. Let's get on with it, shall we? Number 4 is the Smiths' debut album from 1984. The 80s were dominated by synth pop, the heroin chic of the New Romantics, the Burundi beats, of course. And the Smiths' eponymous debut was like a breath of fresh air, a new era, a baptism of layered guitars and mopiness, kind of a post-punk jangle for the Prozac Nation. The songs were catchy and melodic, many certainly were, and unconventional in terms of structure. And Morrissey's crooning had a sort of pathological drone, a sort of Robert Smith ennui, very ironic, very witty. He was kind of like a Mancunian bedsit Oscar Wilde. His mannerisms accentuated by his off-kilter voice and his disrespect for a nicely arranged bouquet. This album was originally recorded with producer Teardrop Explodes guitarist Troy Tate. And the first version of this debut album, the first mix, I think, was eventually rejected. The band were unhappy with the recordings and felt the mix was flatter than a flounder that had been sat on. Morrissey and Rough Trade subsequently hired John Porter to fix it, who felt the album, the problems went way beyond the mixing, and in fact they had to just completely re-record it. So the whole thing was re-recorded in one frantic overnight session. My God, I bet that was cheery. There is a lot of debate amongst the Smiths faithful as to which is the better version. NME said, "Both have their pluses. Tate's take on Hand in Glove is more buoyant and exuberant, for example, while Porter's Suffer Little Children is more eerily atmospheric. Miserable Lie has a taut post-punk energy to it, and Mars' riff complements Morrissey's theatrical falsetto, overlaid by a squall of hooky guitars. There's also that alluring croon and urgent stomp that very much drives the track. What difference does it make?" This album was certainly a statement when juxtaposed with the glamour and colour of 80s pop, with its dour cover, of course, causing many to suggest they were ripping an understated page from the R.E.M. songbook. R.E.M.'s Murmur had been released the previous year. The sleeve for the Smiths album was designed by Morrissey. It featured American actor Joe D'Alessandro in a cropped still from Paul Morrissey's 1968 film Flesh. Many suggest that it was Morrissey's lyrics and antics that were very much the high point or the focal point for this band, which I totally disagree with. I think Johnny Marr's guitar work has always been absolutely exceptional, maybe understated, but exceptional nonetheless. Interestingly, NME critic Don Watson also chose to focus on the band's frontman. He wrote, "What Morrissey captures above all is the notion of despair reflected perfectly in the lackluster sound of his cohorts, the death of the punk ideal that he is quite old enough to have been closely involved in." Many consider the Smiths to be a kind of an anti-punk statement. I don't think the Smiths would ever be that animated, to be honest with you. Number 3 is Meat is Murder from 1985. And although not ranked as their best album, it's certainly lauded for its lyrical depth and musical diversity. And of course, because of the title track, it's also seen as its most political and militant. The album showcases the band's musical influences, everything from rockabilly to funk, but also I think is emblematic of how influential they were themselves. Let's not forget Bernard Manning's wonderful re-recording of those Smiths classics.
And now, Manchester's greatest, biggest, fattest star presents a tribute to the Smiths.
I would go out tonight
By Bernard Manning. You bristled at Meat is Murder. You sulked at The Queen is Dead. You weren't too happy about Girlfriend in a Coma.
This charming man.
Now Big Bernie's brought them together in one pool of misery.
How Soon Is Now is a darker number, but conversely fairly commercial. Many have argued that it's It was inserted onto this album to appeal to the American audience. Nevertheless, the band must have delighted in the fact that this entered the UK charts at #1, dislodging Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA. That seismic yop from the major label, all denim and plaid shirts. Everyone had a copy of Born in the USA in 1985, but only strange people had a copy of this album. It certainly feels very different from the debut album, and certainly more accomplished, as Tony Fletcher points out in his book. The more important aspect regarding Meat is Murder's success was the artistic triumph. Meat is Murder is not merely a collection of tracks, but as an album in the proper sense of the format, it's a coherent musical statement. Mark Ellen, the host of Whistle Test, stated that this was the band's Sgt. Pepper. Kind of overstating it a bit, I think. Nevertheless, this album was adored by the critics and lovies. Stephen Dalton, writing for Uncut, said the album expands on the folk pop classicism of their debut, but is far more dynamic and diverse. Tony Fletcher points out that, thanks in part to excellent sequencing, the musical vicissitudes proved quite harmonious. The amphetamine rush of What She Said and I Want the Ones I Can't Have were balanced by a folk ballad, Well I Wonder, and the rockabilly rumble of Rush Home Ruffians and Nowhere Fast, all offset by the funk of Barbarism Begins at Home. It's certainly an eclectic album, there's no doubt about that, certainly with sound effects borrowed from the BBC. The mooing cows on it was actually taken from a BBC sound effects tape, and they asked the engineer if they can make it sound darker, make it sound more like wholesale slaughter, which of course is the poignant point made by the title track. But despite the finger wagging of the title track, we get the wonderful This Joke Isn't Funny Anymore and How Soon Is Now. And what a great album opener we get in the shape of Headmaster's Ritual. Nevertheless, despite their debut and much loved compilation album Hatful of Hollow, really established them as a musical force. And this was never more apparent than in Johnny Marr's expanding musical vision. Even lyrically, Morrissey upped the foppishness of his game. This is his most, political album. Interestingly, the other band members, Rourke and Joyce, became vegetarian during the album sessions. But I bet the frying pan came out as soon as Morrissey left the building. Meat is Murder was the band's only #1 album, but introduced them to engineer Stephen Street, who would play a pivotal role in crafting the brilliance that would be their next album. #2 is Strangeways, Here We Come from 1987. Morrissey said at the time that, the way things are going, I wouldn't be surprised if I was in prison 12 months from now. Hence the title of this, their last album. Maybe that sense of claustrophobia or the idea of impending imprisonment is perhaps analogous for the mood experienced by the band at this time. This record marked a stylistic shift, incorporating a broader range of instrumentation than their previous releases. Johnny Marr said he intended Strangeways Here We Come to be a tribute to the Walker Brothers, which I'm sure he has no regrets about. With producer Stephen Street, of course, the band have produced a subtly shaded album, with fuller production than before. But not everyone was enamoured by it. Village Voice critic Robert Christgau said, despite the supple smarts of their sound, he was struck by its rather grim tone. Morrissey retrospectively said this is the album of which he is most proud, the old contrarian that he is. And even Johnny Marr constantly names this final album as their very best. This, their last album, was certainly musically the most adventurous, employing a whole range of instrumentation from saxophones to auto harps. Johnny Marr's serrated glam guitar, competing with some beautiful orchestrations. Check out Last Night, I Dreamt That Somebody Loved Me. Strangeways is undeniably a hugely satisfying record. I mean, who doesn't love the wonderful Stop Me If You Think You've Heard This One Before? It certainly brought back that melodic jangle guitar formula that was so loved on the first album. In many ways, this album feels kind of like a goodbye. Interestingly, Death of a Disco Dancer was, I believe, loosely based on the Beatles' Dear Prudence and actually emerged from a long jam session. I must admit, in terms of the band ending here, I tend to agree with Niall Doherty writing for Louder when he said, "It's a shame this was the full stop on the Smiths because it sounds like a gateway to something more experimental and ambitious in scope, taking in haunting piano codas, synthetic strings, ghostly guitar riffs, and on Death of a Disco Dancer, an outro that weds epic post-rock and boogie-woogie piano." Of course, this marked the end of the Smiths' 4 studio albums, a wonderful compilation album, a posthumous live thriller, and the band have kind of been dining out since then by endless compilation albums. And number 1 is The Queen is Dead from 1986. This album is widely considered to be the band's finest work, lauded for its witty, incisive lyrics, musicality, and the band's tight performances. Johnny Marr's guitar work varies from the aggressively serrated riffs to the jangle of earlier Smiths albums. And even Morrissey's vocals deliver a fine balance between humour and pathos, with that Prozac-induced shrug he's famed for. Johnny Marr creates a real dense web of guitars, creating a rich palette of sound, alternating from the minor key rushes of Big Mouth Strikes Again and the faux rockabilly of Vicar in a Tutu. And let's not forget the bouncy pop of Cemetery Gates. This album is undoubtedly a rich musical soup. Morrissey's lyrics are witty satires on British social mores, intellectualism, class, even sends up himself. As usual, they all are rather clever, with Morrissey at his flounciest and funniest here. But not everyone was impressed. Tom Hibbert, writing for Smash Hits, said he praised the guitar work and lyricism, but he described Morrissey as half genius and half buffoon, while the other musical elements are like scratchings on a fifth form desk. But this is a great album in my opinion. Johnny Marr was bang on the money when he described it as having an overloading Smithness to it. The album's title is taken from American writer Hubert Selby Jr.'s 1964 novel Last Exit to Brooklyn. As regards the title, it just reminds me of a quote from Ian Brown from the Stone Roses, when he said, "Hell is being stuck in a lift with Elton John and the Queen Mother." Morrissey said of the title of this album, "It's about the death of a panto queen, and yes, it is autobiographical." And maybe it's that performative aspect of being a pop star that he began to resent. Well, there you are. That's how I would rank the 4 Smiths studio albums, not including that wonderful compilation they put out, of course. There have been numerous compilations since then. Anyway, you've been watching a video by Classic Album Review. If you enjoyed this, please do share it. Click like, subscribe, check that notification bell. I think we've said this. So I'll just leave you with my closing salvo, which is hope you're well, staying safe, and of course that you keep listening.